Welcome to this virtual music education conference series addressing music teacher education in the age of COVID-19. Please note that your microphones have been muted to reduce background noise. Tonight's topic is student teachers and mentors exploring new dimensions in internship. This session will explore how we as college professors work with our education majors and field-based mentors in mutually beneficial ways as we all face new challenges. We are excited to have all participants join in this conversation. If you wish to ask a question or offer a comment, please post using the chat or raise hand features. The icon for chat is located at the bottom of your Zoom window. Similar questions from the chat may be combined and addressed by the discussion leaders, or the leaders may call on you to share your thoughts. If you are called upon, please remember to unmute your microphone before speaking. The microphone icon is located in the bottom left corner of your screen. In just a moment, the session leaders will take a few minutes to frame the topic of this session. We will then open the floor for questions and discussion. The session leaders will offer some concluding thoughts towards the end of our time together before the moderator introduces the next session in this series. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's session moderators, Carlos Abril from the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami, and his mentoring partner, Ryan Gardner from the Wesley Matthews Elementary School in Miami, Florida, myself, Michelle Kashub of the University of Southern Maine, and my mentor partner, Melissa Shabo from Scarborough Middle School in Scarborough, Maine. So let's begin. Carlos?
Thank you, Michelle. So as I started thinking about this topic, I started with some questions. And I was wondering, what if we didn't have prior models of practicums and internships to follow or to abide by just because they've been a hallmark of our signature pedagogies for so long? What if our accrediting bodies gave us some latitude to design practical experiences in teaching and learning in any way we deemed valuable? And what new models might we begin to imagine for bridging meaningful connections between thinking in and about music education and practicing and acting with some level of integrity? In the case of this pandemic, we didn't have a luxury to theorize and debate new models. So much had to change at a breakneck speed to accommodate objective conditions of practice and to ensure student well-being. This summer, though, we finally have a moment to pause and think through how we might move forward. And I think we need to divide how we think forward in both the short-term conditions as well as the long-term conditions, which remain largely unknown and speculative at this point. So to start framing our discussion, I thought I would share some recent reflections which have forced me to ask, what's essential for professional life and teaching, which to me should be what drives our practicum experiences for pre-service teachers. So, as might not be a surprise to many of you, I turned to a 1904 essay by John Dewey. And in that essay, he critiqued practicum experiences seeking to provide what he called a command of necessary tools of the profession, or a control of techniques of instruction and management, and the hard skills of teaching. He called this an apprenticeship model. And in that model, pre-service teachers are expected to imitate best practices of a more experienced mentor. And this model also suggests that one reaches the point of being ready to move into the profession. As well we know, there is nary a teacher who feels completely ready to go on and start teaching in their first year. So in contrast to that model, Dewey described the laboratory model as an alternative where pre-service teachers reference the theoretical and the intellectual, where ideas are tested, where new forms of pedagogy might emerge, where students are observed keenly as they engage with others and with the subject area. In this model, pre-service teachers don't necessarily see themselves as complete or having arrived, but always in formation within a space of inquiry and reflection. This model focuses, I think, on preparing a reflective and a critical pre-service teacher, more so than someone that's merely skilled. So building on this model and drawing on some subsequential work of Lee Shulman and Lois Hetland, I thought more about an apt model that we might use to think and to have this conversation this evening. And I thought maybe a studio model would be a more appropriate metaphor for us, one that maintains the spirit of the laboratory but infuses the culturally sustaining and responsive work with the artistic and the expressive. In this four-pronged model, the goal is for pre-service teachers to practice working as thoughtful and imaginative planners, that is, teachers who practice creating music lessons, learning modules and units that are meaningful to students, address social injustices, speak with and not down to children, respond to culture, ethnicity, race, linguistic backgrounds, special needs, gender identities, or nationalities, and spark creativity and interest in the expressive and social potential of the arts. The other way I think about how they might practice is as mindful improvisers, that is, people who are prepared to respond to the unexpected, to the serendipitous, to the surprising. That can be anything from something small as unexpected comments from kindergartners in a group setting, or maybe something larger like this COVID-19 situation. I want to provide experiences for our pre-service teachers that are responsive so that they can be responsive through a musical utterance, curricula, lessons, words, books, music, and conversations. The third prong to that would be keen observers, that is, those who are able to examine closely the materials they use, the musics, the pedagogies used in the classroom, as well as to come to know the individual students with whom they will work, the classes, the schools, and the communities they are serving. And the fourth is the reflective explorer, who plays with plans, ideas, musics, or models, and the person who's able and willing to question, explain, and evaluate their value in the classroom with or without a mentor, who are willing to consider the moral and ethical ideals of service and care to students and the community. This model, I think, of a studio practicum does not limit itself, but also does not exclude best practice models within the space and approaches that we've come to expect in music education, such as a band room rehearsal or an elementary school music classroom with a rug around which to gather and sing. A studio model, I think, for the practicum experience should work in any space, virtual or face-to-face, or a place, any place in a four-year degree program, not necessarily where we place it. But only when we move away from a singular best practice apprentice model and offer a model for exploring, improvising, observing, and planning, I think will our students be prepared for student teaching or for any entry into the profession. To unpack some of those ideas a little bit further, I want to introduce and turn it over to one of our mentors in Miami, Ryan Gartner, who will unpack some of the skills future teachers may need from his perspective as a mentor to pre-service teachers. Ryan?
Hello, thank you for that wonderful introduction. My name is Ryan Gardner. I teach at Wesley Matthews Elementary School here in Miami, Florida. And also I work at the district level. I'm a curriculum support specialist for South and Central regions of Miami. So in terms of essential skills for future teachers, one thing I feel moving forward you're going to see, especially at the secondary level, is more integration of music technology into the curriculum of the classes. And if we think about it, it's a good opportunity to record practice logs for the students over time, for them to see their progression over the years. It's a good way for them to make their own music and share it with their friends or their family. I think we're going to see a lot more of online collaborating as well, not just from students though, but from teachers and student teachers alike. And in terms of like the toolbox that they're going to need in the future, one thing I've been kind of ruminating on is, as Dr. Brill previously stated, there are so many different types of students that we service, and they all have different and unique needs. And one of the challenges, short-term, but potentially long-term, depending on the decisions that are made about how we continue with education, is being able to accommodate all the needs of all of these children, especially if you have large quantities of students. I teach 500 students a week, 2nd through 5th grade only. We don't do kindergarten and 1st grade. in Miami as of yet. One day that might change. But one of the things I foresee moving forward is providing kind of a blanket accommodation for everybody. And the way I see that being implemented for students who are dyslexic or reading disabled, students who are visually impaired or deaf or hard of hearing, students who are ESOL who have language issues, we cannot always translate things into their language. If, for instance, my school is 90% Hispanic and I'm comfortable with Spanish, but if I'm in a school, for instance, that is servicing students who are European or students from Haiti and many different languages that we don't know, we have to be familiar with the ESOL strategies. So one thing I see moving forward is I think there's going to be a surge. I'm going to be very bold with this. I think there's going to be a surge of teachers seeking training in different methods, specifically more teachers going towards ORF and Dalcroze, because when we think about the classroom, total physical response is one of the natural ESOL strategies we use with our students. So I think really digging into that and being able to use the methodologies of ORF and Dalcroze to teach different subjects. I can give you an example. One of the things I do is I use a Dalcroze rhythm activity for subdividing with walking and clapping around the room with my second graders before I prepare them to play on drum sets so they can start working on subdivision and I can change the beats and patterns they have to perform. So I definitely think there's going to be a very large surge in teachers and especially student teachers becoming more familiar with ORF and Dalcroze approaches, because it's less about literacy and more about speaking and moving and feeling and performing. Another thing I can foresee changing is the supplies that we have our students do at the elementary level. I know it's going to be different for secondary, of course, but speaking to elementary personally, one of the things I am trying to change for coming years is having my students purchase some drumsticks as a required class material. In Miami, they're talking about a model of education where 1 week we see the students in the class, and then the following week will be distance learning and alternating 1 week at a time. Now, nothing is confirmed with that, but one of the beautiful things about drumsticks is you can do so much with them in terms of total physical response to really make sure that your students feel comfortable and your students feel like they can participate without having to worry about their ability to read or understand or speak certain languages, or even some students who are self-conscious, for instance, about singing. And when you combine latency issues online, singing and echoing songs with students to teach them by rote becomes difficult. So with drumsticks, you can do a lot with video instruction and using online platforms to have students share their progress with each other and with you. And it serves as a kind of record-keeping tool. And I think all of these kind of things are things we have to work with student teachers to familiarize and expose them to. And then one of the pressing questions that I've been thinking a lot about is we always talk about how can we be flexible as educators, how can we be nimble and adapt and change? And for me, that comes a lot to mindset. And from the students I've worked with in the past, and I remember from my own experience in internship, you go in with just like this fixed mindset, like this is how it's going to be, this is the only way to do it. And over time, you start seeing that you haven't really been as receptive to what the students are doing, and you need to change things, and things went wrong, but you don't know why. So I feel like having a growth mindset, and on top of the growth mindset, being open to your own self-reflection and the reflection of your clinical supervisor is a really important aspect that we need to instill with the student teachers. And Dr. Brill said it wonderfully when he used the word clinical. A clinical laboratory. That's essentially what the student teaching experience is it is a place for you to find what you want to do inside your own space. It's a safe space where you get to work with your students, find out what works, find out what doesn't work. Because as a teacher, I can tell you, I have never had a day where I have had every single thing go right. Nowhere close. There's always some thing that hits you out of left field. So with that, I would like to pass the baton along to Missy, because I know Missy has a lot that she would like to share. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ryan. My name is Melissa Shabo. I'm the Director of Band at Scarborough Middle School in Scarborough, Maine, where I teach about 300 students, grades 6 through 8 in band and also jazz band. I'm going to talk about some practical concerns as well as some of the positive outcomes that have happened in the course of the last 8 or 9 weeks. I'm going to start with one of my least favorite lines that I keep hearing over and over again the last few weeks is, we are building the plane as we're flying it. And I can't stand, as a teacher, I can't stand that quote because that means we're ever changing. But that's exactly what we're experiencing right now in public education. So it's really hard for, considering taking on an intern teacher at this point in time when you don't know what's going to happen in the fall and you don't know what your program is going to be looking like. So right now we're preparing for everything and anything in between, from continuing on with this distance learning to being back in the classroom and any sort of scenario in between. It's definitely very overwhelming right now to be a public educator at this point in time and trying to plan all of these different educational opportunities for our students. The other challenge is that all school districts are different right now. What might be okay in one school district might not be in a neighboring school. So the approach to distance learning has varied, even though networking has been key. It's hard to plan consistently when the expectations are not the same across neighboring schools and throughout the state. However, there have been quite a few positive outcomes in the last 8 weeks that I have seen, and I want to share some personal outcomes that we've seen in our music department. And I've seen music communities come together in a way that I've never seen before. In my own school district, we struggle to meet as a K-12 music department just because of our varying schedules and time constraints. It's not a priority for us to meet and come together as a unified front. This is a practice that will most definitely continue throughout the summer as we plan together for what the fall might bring. Just to share one item that we've been working on, we've come up with some sort of spring performance for our students. Where we're doing this K-12, we call it Scarborough Porch Fest, where students all over our district will be performing for neighbors and family members. What's even cooler than this, and this thought came from one of our student interns, is that we've created some sort of video sharing where students upload their videos, and now we have this great performance of students K-12. So for the first time ever, all students of all ages have the opportunity to be a part of one performance and see other performances as well. So our interns have been critical with these conversations and help provide feedback and novel ideas to support our students. So as important as it is for student teachers to be a part of this networking and teamwork, it's also great for mentors and teachers to hear fresh voices and ideas in the conversation. I also think the amount of professional development offered during the last 8 weeks of this isolation has just been outstanding. From basic pedagogy to rehearsal techniques, climate and culture, distance learning resources, open forums, like this setting right here, you name it, it's been offered and it's been free. This has been a time of sharing and working on making our best better. And has made me more excited to get back in the classroom and work with my students. I also think another positive outcome has been having us be creative with what we can actually do. Another example I'd like to share is earlier this quarter, I was able to have some of my students participate in a performance pen pal project with the USM music education students. My students submitted a piece that they were practicing, and USM students had the opportunity to offer enrichment activities and provide meaningful feedback. And this project would have never happened if it wasn't for our current learning situation. I also think communication is a key skill that has to be a focal point with student teachers. Whether it's a student or an intern, still a person who needs guidance and support. How we present ourselves in virtual meetings and professional development is still a learning opportunity for our interns. Even though it's virtual, keep demonstrating professional environment and continue to make connections to help support student teachers and our young musicians. Like providing feedback to our students, which is one of the highest yielding teaching techniques we provide. I'm a huge John Hattie fan. Our student teachers deserve the same. Providing a culture of feedback is critical to the success of any learning environment, even if it is virtual. I'd just like to finalize that in Maine, I've been so amazed with how we've been able to come together and support one another. Often in our schools, there's only one band director or even just one music teacher in each of our school buildings. So you definitely feel like you're on an island or you're isolated. We have been able to build a community of sharing resources and ideas within our small middle school band community in our state. And again, these are all things that we've been sharing with our student teachers so they can take part of the opportunities and resources that are being offered. So I just wanted to share, those are kind of my thoughts. And now I'm going to pass the mic over to Michelle.
Thank you, Missy. As I've been listening to my colleagues speak, I have been reminded of what I consider my major concern with student teaching and field work for next year, and particularly so if we're in online or blended environments. And that is what Missy was just speaking about, isolation and communication. I think one of the things that I find as I send student teachers into the world is that they do experience a period of transition that's very hard for them, where they feel isolated, isolated from their cohort that they've traveled through school with. They're in a new land, they're teaching in somebody else's room. There are a lot of transitions in that time when we're leaving the college classroom and entering the K-12 classrooms. So I'm very interested in strategies for helping our interns build relationships with their mentors. This is a very different format to talk with your mentor. Even if you're having one-on-one meetings with your mentor, it's very different than hanging out in the office with a cup of coffee and looking at a score together or planning a lesson together. Some of the interpersonal skills that develop in those experiences take on a slightly different feel in this environment. So I'm very concerned about monitoring how our student teachers feel as they enter their internships, and particularly so in that they know that the internship that they're about to enter is going to look very different than the one that we usually offer. If we're in these environments, we're not spending as much time on the podium, or maybe any time on the podium. We don't have those children gathered around the carpet, as Carlos was describing. We can't see that all the second graders are marching on the beat or not. And it's very hard to have an online conversation with 20 second graders. I don't think anyone is particularly great at doing that yet, right? So these are very real skills that our students need to work on, and at the same time, they're skills that many of us are working on for the first time ourselves. So building community, building communication, and really helping our students enter into these new relationships with grace and with professionalism, and with the idea that not everything is going to be perfect, and it wasn't perfect before, and that's okay. And so I guess we'd like to open this conversation up and hear from you and what some of your concerns are as college faculty getting ready to send interns into the world or into their bedroom with their computer to teach a small group lesson. Or for those of you who are practicing teachers, what are your concerns, or what are you thinking about as you consider taking on mentees in the next school year?
I think Jan's trying to speak. Jan, are you not able to unmute yourself? Okay.
Michelle, the chat doesn't seem to be open. Was that deliberate on your part? In other words, the only people on the chat are the presenters at the moment?
No, other people are there too.
Okay. Now it's coming. Okay. Initially, when I clicked on everyone, it showed only the presenters. So.
Janet is asking a question about what can we say to potential supervising practitioners to encourage them to take a student teacher. I'm going to assume we mean student and not stunted, but a student teacher. So Ryan or Missy, either one of you, I know that you're anxious to get student teachers, but if you have a colleague who's maybe hesitant about that, what thoughts might you offer them?
I'll go first. So in my experience in Miami, what I've seen and what I've heard from other music teachers is it's not really them not wanting one, but it's the fact that their principal will not allow them to have one. And that's one of the concerns I have moving forward in general and for myself is with this whole scare, the principal will not allow it because they want as few people in the building as possible.
Exactly right. And in fact, Ryan, that happened with my student teacher who was actually moving on to a new placement. Right when we switched, that new school would not accept him just for that very reason. So I think challenge one thing is that each school district is different, right? They have different policies or unwritten policies in how they handle student teachers. I think from my perspective, I'm always welcoming student teachers because I really enjoy helping other people teach and sharing my joy and passion for education. But I think right now what we really need is some empathy as a public education teacher, because right now it's not stable, and we just need some support, especially at the university level, and however you can help support the public school teachers during this time.
And I go back, Missy, to something you were saying, the importance of communication and also the facility with which we can communicate now with each other through Zoom. And so there are new opportunities that open up, but I think that communication with people we've relied on and that we've worked with for so many years to open those channels already so that we could start figuring out a plan so that we can allay the concerns of administrators who don't. I mean, I've even heard of administrators, not because they're concerned with more people coming into the school so much as they're concerned that the teacher will even be able to manage this new environment, and they don't want an added layer of responsibility that teacher has to take on. So, I mean, it could be an opportunity for us when we open those channels for communication for us to think through things together with the people that we've worked with so many years and think through models, because I know many of them are having to, many teachers in Miami-Dade are having to figure out the model that they're going to create for their blended or their asynchronous or synchronous music teaching. So I think that's an important point to remember. And thank you, Missy, for reminding us to do that, to communicate.
I'm not sure how many other universities are doing this, but at my university, we have a council that oversees all teacher ed, even though we're spread across different colleges. And we've just gotten together and created a letter that's going out to all of the schools that we work with that is advocating for allowing student teachers and field work to continue, and for thinking about that now, to ensure that we have a place for our student teachers to do their work, and for our freshmen, sophomore, juniors to be able to do field work, to be able to visit classes that are happening online, or to go into buildings as that is allowed. So that might be something that other people consider, is creating that kind of letter.
And I don't know, I mean, I'm sure many have gone to the state level and looked at the policies that bind us and limit us in terms of how many hours or how much time a student needs to be in a student teaching experience or some practicum experience. But I was really surprised that the Florida Department of Education offers such wide latitude. There is nothing that even specifies that it has to be a student teaching practicum. No hours are specified. So I wonder if we start with the policies, which from what I've come to understand have been relatively flexible in some states, or been made more flexible as a result of COVID-19. But there may be more latitude than we even think that we can be working with and rethinking the practicum experience starting in the fall.
So looking at the chat, there are two questions that are kind of similar. They both have to do with preparing student teachers in an unstable kind of environment like we're right now. One is referring to how, this one's from Nurse from Manila, how can mentor teachers prepare their student teachers not only for virtual teaching, but also for when they move into their own in-person classrooms if they will not have that traditional experience during student teaching. And then the message right after that is kind of similar, but it's just talking about the discrepancies between different districts. One of the things that I personally think is if you can student teach in this current scenario, when you step into a normal classroom full time, it will be, I feel personally, I mean, sure, you won't have as much of that in-person experience yet, but there's so much to be said about social learning and social interaction with students that even if you're in kind of an unfamiliar territory, if, you know, your first year, let's say hypothetically, you're teaching online, and then your second year, you're teaching, you're finally in a classroom face-to-face with students, don't get me wrong, it's definitely going to come with its own set of challenges. But I feel that if they've been prepared in their student teaching experience in their 4 years of college instruction in their schools, that so long as they have networked and communicated and been put into contact in groups with other music teachers, of which there are many groups out there, I feel that it won't be as drastic a change as you might think.
Gina Greer, did you want to speak a little bit to the technology prep for field work and for student teachers?
There. It's very, very spotty across the country. So, you know, I know in certain programs, student teachers are being prepared to work with technology and they know the tools that are out there. But for the most part, what I've been discovering is that a lot of teachers are feeling kind of lost at sea with regard to that. And, you know, the other thing that I'm discovering is that there are a lot of tools that our students are going to need and an investment that needs to be made that in a lot of districts, they're not going to have that. And there's, you know, where my students are really prepared to teach with technology, but a lot of the districts that our students are working in, we're not online. The kids are getting worksheets. And the other thing that we're discovering is that the kids really need to have some kind of weekly check-in. You know, doing the teaching asynchronously is not going to be working for their social emotional health. So there's a lot of inconsistency, you know, from district to district. Even within my own community, some schools are online, some schools are still doing worksheets. You know, so we need to, you know, in addition to the professional development that we need to provide teachers now, this summer, you know, while we have time to think about it, and not just throw things up, you know, in a week like we had the opportunity to do in March, we need to think about what our students have, what kind of equipment they have, You know, I had students in my string project checking in on cell phones, some on laptops, some on iPads, you know, whatever their parents had. But, you know, what is the quality? And how, and we also have to rethink, what do we want to accomplish musically? You know, we know that a lot of the ensemble work is just not going to be able to happen in the same vein that it happens when we are on campus. And even now, thinking about what classes are going to be like when we go back to campus, we're going to be at 25% capacity if we have to adhere to social distancing. So there's a lot that technology can do, but if everybody doesn't have the same kind of access, the same kind of bandwidth, it's really going to be spotty.
Thank you, Gina. I think one of the things that we keep looking to is technology to solve all the problems, and at the same time, not everyone has access to technology in the way that we really need to have access for that to work. So we have a couple of questions in the chat about how do we observe student teachers when their teaching situation is creating worksheets and teacher developed videos. How do we provide feedback and guidance when they're doing work that is largely theoretical in the creating of a worksheet, or rather one-sided in the creation of a video? So does anyone want to address that? Dan Abrams, yours was the comment that stuck out on that topic.
And I might also loop in Daniel Johnson's comment here, because Daniel Johnson was saying that many of us don't have this experience in teaching virtually. So here we are. I mean, it's a double whammy, right? We've never done it. We don't have the experience, yet we're supervising the work that they're doing as well. So is Dan there?
Yes, Carlos. You know, that's exactly my thought. You know, that we're on the one hand, we're in charge of giving the student teachers the guidance and certainly finding cooperating teachers in the field. But if we've never taught K-12 students online ourselves, how prepared are we to do that? I personally don't feel very prepared, and I think that many of us have the same disadvantage. And hearing other people's comments earlier this evening, there's such a variability in the settings and such a difference in terms of what students actually can do in their homes on the K-12 students, that it's difficult for us to say, well, you just go in and you set up the xylophones. You just go in and you have them stand around the piano. But if they don't have the tools on the receiver's end, on the student end, I think it's an open question. And I think that one other thing that this whole situation brings to mind what I remember from about 10 or 12 years ago, when online graduate education came into vogue, and we were having people starting to earn doctorates and master's degrees online. And the big question was, how do college professors deliver graduate courses online in a totally virtual setting when they can't sit around the same conference table and have those discussions? So I don't think that it's a direct parallel, but it occurs to me like that there was a realization that the people who earned a doctorate online, they should be the best people to teach those online programs once they had the experience in a college position and that kind of thing. But bringing it back to a K-12 setting, I just don't feel like many of us are prepared to mentor student teachers if we don't have that experience. And I don't think many of us do. So don't have an answer, but those are just my concerns this evening.
Jan, you got a hand raised?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I spent part of the afternoon mentoring a brand new graduate who has a job interview. And it is an online interview. And she is a instrumental major looking at a middle school position. And they had asked her for Thursday to prepare a lesson plan to teach something about rhythm, which is all they said, and that it had to be interactive. And there were these list of things, but they wanted her to teach it two ways. They wanted her to teach it as if she were teaching them as a face-to-face class, and then as she would teach it in a virtual environment without using a worksheet, okay? So whether we're prepared or not, our students are going to be asking us how to help with that situation. Now, she's a bright cookie, and she was easy to talk with this afternoon, and we came up with about 4 different ideas of how she might proceed. She came with an idea, I came with an idea, and we just talked them through, and she's proceeding to do what they were asking her to do. But the students who are going to be job hunting now and in the fall, and probably for the foreseeable future, may have to be able to demonstrate that they can actually come up with something to teach online, particularly if they're at the middle school or high school level. I'm not sure whether elementary is going to continue to ask for that or not. We'll see. I'm worried about the elementary programs, and perhaps this is needless, but I think it would be easy when people are elementary teachers seeing 500 or 600 students a week to say, well, this just can't work online, and so we're going to get rid of the program and we'll start it in middle school. That certainly happened about 30 years ago in New York City, I think. It could happen again. I wanted to briefly address too the people who said that perhaps where we need to start is with the State Department of Education. You can get the opposite extreme, which is what New York is. Everything is spelled out in grave detail. How many hours they have to student teach, what kinds of placements they have to have, that sort of thing. Now, there is some flexibility there, and they have tried to figure out what they're going to do about EdTPA. Somebody else raised the question about that. How does EdTPA work in a virtual environment? And that's a really good question that no one seems to know the answer to. But what New York did was to go back to the test that they gave before they had EdTPA, and said that students could have a choice this year as to whether they did the EdTPA or they took what's called the AST. Most of our students had already done their first placement, and we almost mandate that they do the videos for EdTPA during their first placement, because otherwise, if they screw something up, they don't have time to redo it. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. I feel that it's better to do something than to do nothing. I don't think it's a question of we've got to find the best idea to work and just do that. I think there are a lot of different approaches we can do with that. And it harkens back to what you were saying about communication. If you have communication with the principal, building principals, and the people in the schools that you're working with, it's easier to advocate for the fact that student teachers should be allowed. But there are schools that will just plain say no, and you have to move on and find another place where your students can go, that they will allow you to do that. I don't know if any of you have taught online classes to your own students where you were observed by a colleague, but I've been in the position of having to observe an online class, and it's, they have to give you access to the class, usually as a visitor. It's the same sort of thing. You want to see what they have planned to do, and then you go in and watch the class, much as we're watching each other's tonight. That's all.
You know, I think I've been noticing some of the comments that have popped up, Jan, and I think it speaks to your point, is not only do we communicate, but how we communicate and what we communicate with the folks that can, the gatekeepers to our schools. But what I've been seeing on the chat is people saying, there's this wisdom that comes from the youth, the student teachers, the younger ones who come in with new ideas. They might not have as rigid of a model as what they're coming into. And so they come in with ideas. They grew up with technology in a different way than maybe somebody who's been teaching 20 years. And together that they can solve problems that they couldn't have done on their own. And maybe that might be an important thing to communicate. Seeing the student teaching as a laboratory experience, that would be of benefit to both mentor and mentee, and to the benefit of the students ultimately.
That's absolutely true, and then I can vouch for that. That happened with us this year. I want to go back to someone had asked about technology and having the technology that they need. Schools have devices, and I wouldn't be afraid to ask if I had a student teacher who needed a laptop or some sort of subscription to something that, you know, it never hurts to ask for that device, and they usually have plenty of devices on hand to supply for students. So if you're looking for technology and someone's taking in an intern, that's certainly one thing to think about.
And to piggyback off of that, in Miami-Dade County, any students who needed a device could check out a device from their school, and they're allowed to keep it over the summer until next school year.
Frank, do you want to speak to the comment that you just made?
Is the mute off? You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I think that we're spending a lot of time teaching our student teachers how to teach content online. In fact, in some of the methods classes I have observed around, student teachers are learning how to teach regular content online. And I think we're forgetting that, I don't think anyway, that students, our college student teachers and their students in the schools know how to learn online. And I think learning online is very different than learning live in a class, especially if it's synchronous, where you can't ask the teacher at the very minute, or the teacher doesn't see you messing up at the very minute it's happening. They see it at another time. And I think that Gina said several meetings ago about the importance of project-based and empowering students to learn on their own and do some informal music learning kinds of things and projects. And I think that's a real shift in the way we've traditionally taught music in schools. There has been, of course, projects, and of course of technology, but I mean, we assume kids are all techno experts. They're not. They can play a video game, but it doesn't mean they can learn the content that we want to teach them if they don't know how to learn. And I think that's something that those of us preparing student teachers and student teachers teaching in the schools need to address, because I also don't think their cooperating teachers know. That's all I had to contribute there.
Yeah, and to add to that too, the social emotional component is huge right now. You know, when you're in the building and talking with kids face to face, I took great pride in building positive rapport with my students on a daily basis, and that looks way different now online. So there's definitely a need to build in a lot more time than I've ever had to continue those relationships and really checking on those students, because that is a really, really important component to online learning right now.
And I'd just like to add, you know, I was particularly taken by Carlos's comment, going back to Lois Hetland's work with the studio habits of mind. I would recommend her book Studio Thinking, because it is pretty much, you know, developing the kinds of habits of mind that we want our students to have. And if we develop the right kind of open-ended projects, you know, thinking about what is it we want our students to learn, and creating projects where they can be personally invested. And another, you know, in addition to the studio habits of mind, I would also, and I was talking to this with some of my colleagues in Massachusetts the other day, Mitch Resnick's book, Lifelong Kindergarten. And it's about play and passion and projects and developing the kinds of things that our students naturally are interested in, and how do we take that into giving them, you know, imparting the kinds of musical thinking have. And it's possible to do it online, and there are tools to do it, but we really have to shift our pedagogy.
I wanted to comment on using videos as instruction. I think Frank mentioned that, you know, you have a lot of ends of the spectrum. You have students, I mean, I had a student that couldn't sign in the first week because she didn't know how to type in the password without it being capital letters. And then on the other end of things, I have students sending in recordings of them practicing their instruments at home that I never asked them to do. So I think it all depends on the platform that you use and make available to your students. One of the things I've seen is Flipgrid. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with Flipgrid, but it's basically this website where you can respond to each other with videos, or you can just type your responses for videos, but you can upload them into project rooms where all the students, let's say it's an assignment. So an assignment is play, you know, hot cross buns on the recorder, and all the students, they go to the screen, and on the screen, it just says tap here to record. They record their project. If they don't like it, they can start it over. And it's accessible on any mobile devices, things like that. And it's a great way for them to see each other progress. And, you know, as teachers, and especially for student teachers, and especially my student teaching experience, there was a lot of emphasis that was placed on record yourself teaching and watch yourself back, because you learn a lot by seeing and hearing yourself perform your craft, because teaching is essentially one large performance. So I still think there's a lot of value in using recording assignments with students, because they might start to notice things that they're doing, or things, you know, maybe, oh, this note's always squeaking because I'm missing my fingering, because they can see the video. And with that, you can still provide feedback for them, and they can watch their own recordings back, keeping your feedback in mind. Now, I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but by any means, but I'm saying there is some value in it.
I was just reading Olive Summers' great comment here. I think that one of the things that we really need to draw on is a sense of collaboration with our mentors and with our student teachers, in the idea that we're going to be figuring it out together, and everyone is going to bring different types of knowledge to the table as we do so, which is what is great about this kind of conference here, is that people have different perspectives and different things that they're trying, and we're all learning together. And I don't think there's any better model than a model where students understand that we are learners and working together to achieve something. Ayla, did you want to address this?
You know, in the meantime, I want to say something that's building upon what I've been hearing in Summer's comment as well. And that is the surprise, my utter surprise at my students' reactions, my student teachers who were in the field in the spring. And, you know, on the one side, there's the wellness, there's the well-being, which I completely understand the panic people were feeling. But there was this other sense when we even broached the idea of working together with your mentor teacher to develop something online as a possibility. This is when we were figuring out what we were going to do and what the university's policy was going to be. And it was as if the student teachers felt it was a wash, because music teaching just cannot work. And I think it's because there's this rigid notion that the only way elementary music can work is if I've got that rug and I've got my guitar and I've got them on the floor, or the band can work in a rehearsal, in a band room, in a rehearsal setting. And I started to reflect on that and say, well, what is it in our programs that we can do to get students to be more inquisitive, to get students to be more creative, to try new things? And I was reflecting on my own work as a music teacher educator and thinking, well, maybe in some way I'm sending signals that there is a, you know, there is a way to do this. And maybe, and for so long, our assumption was that it would be a classroom, or sometimes in the elementary setting, it's somebody traveling, and that was a worst case scenario, right? You had the music teacher on the cart, but that was always the barrier, and it was a very fixed, and this is what I was describing John Dewey was referring to as this apprentice model. I'm the mentor, I'm going to give you what you need to know to welcome you into this profession, rather than saying, we don't know what this profession is going to be like. You are in part going to generate what music education will be moving forward. And that's that disposition that it's a tricky one to figure out. How do you model that, or how do you celebrate that, or how do you engender that mindset? I think it was you, Ryan, that mentioned mindset in your opening remarks, and I've been thinking a lot about those mindsets and dispositions. Michelle, you were passing the baton to somebody else. Did that?
To Ayla.
Yeah, I was just mentioning in the chat about the number of students that I have that have been homeschooled, and I certainly plan to solicit their input a lot more in the future about how they've been able to be in charge of their own learning and motivate themselves. I don't have a lot of ideas about it well, I've got ideas, but they're not fully formed yet. And one of the things that I'm doing this summer, last week in June, is I'm going to take a course online and see how it works from that perspective, and watch what somebody else is doing to teach it to me. See how it works. So
That's a great plan, Ayla. I love that you're talking to students about what works for them. I think one of the things in all this where I learned the most about online teaching and my undergrads was at the end of the year, when I invited all of my music ed students into our pro seminar together online and said, so put on your thinking hat. You've been an online student for 6 or 8 weeks, not in a perfect online environment, but in a quickly assembled crisis one. If you had to do this as a teacher, what do you now know about the student experience? And they told me so many fantastic things about how long they can look at a screen before they lose their mind, why they prefer to have the camera turned off, how online learning was taking up so much more of their time because faculty were creating all this material for them to process and still holding full-length Zoom classes. So I think that there's so much to learn, but one of the places we have to start in learning it is to ask students what works for you in this environment, and then not be afraid to change what we do. Like, we don't have to have the perfect plan and execute it, because we all know as teachers that there is no such thing as a perfect plan, and it never goes perfectly. I think, Ryan, you made that point earlier. But constantly checking in with students about what's working and what's not working and how can we make that better is better than designing, the future kind of blind. So that's my 2 cents.
I think those are great points, Michelle. I think we also need to be very mindful of how we're reaching all our students with special needs, students whose first or second or third language is not English, because so many of the techniques that we maybe model in our methods course, we may model some of those techniques, universal design for learning, for instance, but they're assuming we're in a classroom space. And I think we're leaving many of these students behind because we don't have the chart. We don't have the nonverbal symbols that we used to use. So I think that needs to be part of the conversation as well. How we ensure we are responding to the special needs of different students in our classrooms.
I would love to piggyback on that. So one of the things Miami-Dade County has implemented is each teacher has 3 hours of office hours. Sorry. Is my mic working now?
You're good.
Okay. It you know, troubleshooting. So basically we have to keep a set amount of hours each day to be able to have meetings with students. So that's one best practice. Another thing I've been doing throughout this whole thing is, you know, I was lucky to be chosen to pilot a year of Quaver, and I was able to make accounts for all my students. And anyone who teaches elementary knows that if you want to have student accounts, it's better to make them yourselves so you don't get someone smashing their hand on a keyboard for their username and you have no idea who they are. But one of the things I did, because I feel it's just so important, is that they see my face every week. And so I made a lot of my own instructional videos with instruments I have in my house. I made a whole unit on string family for some of my students. And it was just me talking about the instrument like I would explain it to them in the classroom. And, you know, we always talk about guided listening. So in the video, so the way I formatted it was, you know, there's a Word document of guided listening questions in case, you know, some students are visual learners and they just need to see the questions. But also at the start of the videos, I want you to listen for, you know, these things. And at the end of it, through Quaver, you can like make your own little quizzes, because Miami-Dade, unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, there are benefits of both, but it can become difficult in terms of data collection. They're like all about data right now, and they want to see something concrete right now, which I have a few qualms with personally as music teacher and online learning, where students are just trying to navigate, but they want to see concrete data. But I guess my main point there, sorry I rambled a little bit, was that it's still incredibly important for the students to see your face each week, either, you know, in small group Zooms, one-on-one Zooms, or instructional videos. And I'll leave you with, we have one student here in Miami who's at a mega magnet school. And every week she hosts social hour Zooms for her students, and they're themed. So one week they had a Harry Potter Zoom where they just nerded out over Harry Potter, and the next week they nerded out over classical composers. And so we still have to provide opportunities for our students to be social, because this might be the only platform where they can communicate with each other.
Joe Abramo, you mentioned something about reading people. I'm wondering if you want to comment on that, because I think it's really intriguing what you're saying, and I think it requires us to think deeply, because that's such an important part of the way so many of us think about teaching and learning, and that's reading. And it's hard to read on these little squares. Joe, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like my own teaching style, I'm a big jokester. Like, I totally read a room and I can feel, you know, I mean, we all, whether you're a jokester or not, you totally feel like you just read somebody. You can read their body language. You can read their face. You know when somebody doesn't get something and you need to back around and do it again. And it's so obvious to me that, you know, when we're in our Brady Bunch formation here, that you can't read the body language in the same sort of way. And what that made me reflect about is like how much I, as a teacher educator, rely on conveying those things to my students. So, you know, I'll tell them all sorts of, you know, they get annoyed at me, for example, when they say, how do I do X, Y, or Z? And I say, well, it depends. You have to read your students. It's the context. It's all of that. And, you know, I realize that the tools I give them to do those things are so dependent on being in a room with somebody. And it's kind of shaken me in the sense that I've always thought, all right, I have taken the time to think about what are the core practices that I need to give my students. And regardless of the context, they'll be able to use these core practices. Well, one of the things I just learned is that what I thought my core practices were are not as universal as I thought they were. So, yeah, so I guess that's just the sort of thing I'm struggling with. So I do wonder if, You know, I went to teachers college, right? There's a bust of Dewey, and I only use Dewey because you said Dewey. It's like, but maybe, you know, like Dewey was in a room with people. Maybe he doesn't have something to say to us anymore, and we need to move on in a way. I don't think, I'm saying that as an exaggerated way to kind of provoke something and prove a point, but you know, maybe we're just not prepared. I think we all know that. Anyway, I'll stop blabbing.
Thanks, Joe. You know, the one point I was thinking about, and one of the things I think is so important for our pre-service teachers to develop, is the ability to mindfully improvise. And I think of the comedic improvisers. They have to read a room so thoughtfully and carefully. And I'm thinking of the difference between, I'm a fan of Trevor Noah and The Daily Show. And I still am a fan, but Colbert. It's been interesting to see the two of them go on to online format. Colbert seems to be so desperate to get a response. He doesn't have anybody to read, and when he's in this new environment, to me, it falls flat. Whereas Trevor Noah has figured out a different way of being. And yeah, he can't read us because we're not there, but he realized this is a different platform, this is a different space, and I still need to connect with you, and here's how I do it. And his timing is different, and so much about his demeanor is different. And so, yeah, I want to think about that some more, Joe, but thanks for bringing that up, because that to me as an educator it's paramount to everything I do, is eye contact. It's being in an embodied space with other people. And so this feels odd.
Yeah, I want to comment on that, you know, because the feedback I got from my student teachers who were teaching in my stream project online this semester, they felt that they connected better with the students in this environment than they had before, when they were doing traditional on-campus classes. And maybe it was because they actually took the time to connect with their students and do a check-in and ask how everybody was doing, where normally in the on-campus environment, you know, the students would come in, they tune the instruments, and they get to work. In this environment, you know, my TAs actually took the time to like reach out to the students and talk about, you know, how they're doing before they began their musical work. So maybe we need to rethink how we conduct our classes, and maybe we need to reach out more to our students on a more personal level than when they walk into our class and we just start our discussions. Just throwing that out there as an idea.
Thanks, Gina. I wonder if it also gets us to rethink what profession we're preparing them for. And we assume that we're preparing them for a profession in schools, but what if somebody really relishes being a talking head, or relishes that providing more of a Sesame Street type of segment on music rather than being in a classroom? And isn't that a valuable skill? And some students may gravitate towards that kind of teaching and learning environment more than others. And maybe there will be, hopefully, spaces for them to develop that and serve children in some way through music education, but in a different platform, a different profession.
I would love to piggyback on that. I've seen a tremendous spike in participation from my students and attitude from my students with severe ADHD. They seem to be absolutely flourishing, working at their own space, at their own pace in their own space. That's just one thing that I've kind of noticed. And it kind of makes you think, you know, Howard Gardner always talked about the multiple intelligences. I think we're moving into a time period where technology is another phase of intelligence. And for some students, this kind of platform, this kind of opportunity to learn, they're going to flourish in because it's something that speaks to them.
I'd like to sort of piggyback off of Joe and Gina's comments. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see friendly faces. You know, one of the things that's been really interesting, and we had this, and Gina, thank you for the recommendation. I ordered that book. One of the things that's been really interesting right now, as I think about, to Joe's point of like, you don't have access to reading the room the way that we used to, is I've really taken a lot of time to observe how my son's kindergarten teacher is trying to create connection and community with the class. And as she's watching the class in real time and she's seeing how the students' engagement, like what's working, what's not, how she's changing things, how my son takes Suzuki viola, and how even in that case, his teacher is changing things, and they're actually modeling for me, okay, so how do I take the essence of those things? So they're looking at what's happening, they're seeing what's coming back, and being so creative in not just having, you know, your half-hour class, versus I've seen the exact opposite in some of the other lessons that are set up that are disastrous every week. And it's just, we're just going to stick with this model because that's what we're doing. And I think that there's a lot, that's the point that I was trying to make, that it's modeling that flexibility and that creativity with our students, and being open to seeing and to being adaptable to maybe our syllabi or maybe what we're doing with our students isn't complete. And there are lots of big spaces so that we can say things are going to unfold in a way that we're not sure what it might be. And so let's create spaces so that we can be flexible even within a semester, or even within a quarter within the semester, and continue to cycle back. I don't really think I don't know if I made. Joe, you're nodding.
Thank you, Summer. Those were great points. I think that curiosity, the curiosity about like, how is this going to work, and then flexibility is a perfect partnership for moving forward. How do we remain curious? How do we avoid fatigue? Because there is a huge fatigue factor here that we've all experienced. And then how do we kind of reconstruct ourselves and move forward with an eye towards flexibility? So those are really great points, Summer. Did anyone else want to speak this evening? In case anyone doesn't have the chat open, Carlos is filling it full of readings, so that when you do get to go to the beach, you can read really interesting things as you tan lightly.
Those are the 3 readings that I referred to, so I wanted you to have those.
Thank you, Carlos.
The citations.
Well, I guess we need to draw us to a close. So I would like to thank my presenting partners tonight, Carlos Abril, Ryan Gardner, and Melissa Shabo. And I'd like to thank all of you who attended and those who contributed to the discussion. This has been a wonderful forum for brainstorming ideas and for inviting new ways of thinking and new perspectives into our mindset as we move forward. Tonight's session, as well as the previous 2 sessions of this virtual conference, can be found on YouTube. If you simply search the title of this conference, Music Teacher Education in the Age of COVID-19, it will take you to those videos. It usually takes me 2 or 3 days to kind of edit one of these and put it up. I don't do fancy editing, just kind of the basic run-of-the-mill editing, but it will be there shortly. Please use the same Zoom link and join us on Monday, June 15th. So that's in 2 weeks, Monday, June 15th, for session 4 of this conference, featuring Frank Abrahams, Frank Huser, and David A. Williams as they discuss promoting student creativity in traditional ensembles, initiating promising futures. And this concludes session 3 of Music Teacher Education in the Age of COVID-19. Thank you all for being here. Be safe and be well, and we'll hope to see you next time.